Welcome back to Silent Revenge Lab, the best channel for revenge stories. They say blood is thicker than water, but in my family, blood is just something you spill to get to the bank vault. My name is Sloane Sterling. I'm 26 years old, a former architectural designer, and until 10 minutes ago, I was the favorite granddaughter of the late billionaire matriarch, Beatrice Sterling. We were gathered at the Sterling Highlands estate in Aspen, not for a funeral, but for the asset finalization. It was supposed to be the day I took over the foundation. Instead, it became the day I was branded a criminal. The silence in the room wasn't peaceful, it was predatory. My mother, Genevieve, didn't look at me with love. She looked at me like a stain on her silk blouse. She stood up, her $50,000 diamond earrings catching the light, and cleared her throat. "It's a tragedy," she whispered, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "To think we raised a thief under this very roof. Sloane, did you really think you could slip $3 million out of grandmother's offshore accounts and nobody would notice?" I felt the oxygen leave the room. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Before I could even open my mouth, my father, Arthur, slammed his fist onto the conference table. The sound was like a gunshot. "Don't bother lying," he roared. "The audit doesn't lie. The digital footprint leads straight to your laptop. You've been skimming from a dying woman for months." Then came the final blow. My twin sister, Cassidy, leaned back in her chair, her face a mask of fake pity. "I always knew you were jealous of the family legacy, Sloane. But stealing from the woman who gave you everything? That's a new low, even for a creative like you. Just admit it, give the money back, and maybe we won't call the police." "Hold on, before we get into the real stuff, I want to know, what are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments." I looked around the room. Every aunt, uncle, and cousin was nodding. They weren't shocked, they were satisfied. They had spent years trying to push me out of the will, and now they finally had the leverage. The lawyer, a man who had known me since I was a child, wouldn't even meet my eyes. He just shuffled the papers and sighed. "Sloane Sterling," the lawyer said solemnly, "according to the morality clause in your grandmother's will, any heir found guilty of financial impropriety or theft against the estate is immediately disinherited. You are to leave this property with nothing but the clothes on your back." They thought they had won. They thought I was the weak link they could snap to increase their own shares. My mother stepped forward, a cold, victorious smirk playing on her lips. "Hand over your keys, Sloane. You're finished." I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, silver remote. "You're right about one thing, Mother," I said, my voice finally steady. "Money really does reveal people's true colors. And today, the world is going to see yours in 4K. The room went cold. Cassidy's smirk faltered. "What are you talking about?" I pointed the remote at the massive presentation screen behind the lawyer. "Grandmother knew this was coming. She knew none of you could wait for her heart to stop beating. So, she helped me set a trap." I pressed the button. The screen flickered to life, but it wasn't a bank statement. It was a grainy, night vision feed from grandmother's private study, dated 3 nights before she passed. The room went so quiet you could hear the snow hitting the window panes. My family stared at the screen, and for the first time, I saw the blood drain from my mother's face. The video wasn't just a recording, it was a confession they didn't know they were making. On the screen, the door to grandmother's private study pushed open. The figure was wearing a silk robe, clutching a master key, a key only 3 people in the world possessed. It was my mother, Genevieve. The room in Aspen was now so silent, you could hear the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. My mother stood frozen, her hand hovering over her throat, her eyes fixed on her own digital image. On screen, she wasn't the grieving daughter. She was a scavenger. She walked straight to the safe behind the portrait of the Sterling patriarch, her movements practiced and cold. "Is this a joke?" my father, Arthur, barked, though his voice lacked its previous iron. He looked at Genevieve, then back at the screen. "Genevieve, what is this?" It's AI. Cassidy shrieked, her voice hitting a glass-shattering pitch. "Sloane, You're a designer. You've manipulated this. You're trying to frame Mom because you got caught. I didn't blink. I just watched the screen. Keep watching, Cassidy. The best part isn't the theft. It's the conversation. On the video, the study door opened again. A second figure walked in. It was my father. He didn't look surprised to see his wife breaking into a safe. In fact, he checked his watch and hissed, "Hurry up. The lawyer is downstairs finishing the first draft of the amendment. If we don't swap the account routing numbers now, the girl gets the foundation and we're stuck with the crumbs." The family members around the table gasped. My aunt leaned back, her face twisted in a mix of horror and sudden realization. The narrative was shifting. The thief wasn't the girl standing in the middle of the room. The thieves were the ones sitting in the seats of judgment. On the screen, my mother pulled out a stack of documents and a flash drive. The very flash drive that contained the digital footprint they had used to accuse me. "This will link everything to Sloane's IP address," Genevieve said on camera, her voice chillingly clear. "By the time the audit hits, she'll be so buried in legal fees she won't even be able to afford a public defender, let alone run a foundation." I turned to look at my parents. My father's face had turned a deep, bruised purple. My mother was shaking, her designer heels no longer clicking with confidence, but trembling against the hardwood floor. "You set us up," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No," I replied, stepping closer to her. "You set yourselves up. You forgot that grandmother was the one who taught me how to design secure systems. She knew you'd come for her legacy the moment she couldn't defend it. She asked me to install this camera the day she was diagnosed." But then, a new figure appeared on the screen. Someone we didn't expect. Someone who wasn't supposed to be in the house that night. The figure stepped into the light of the desk lamp, and the entire room, including me, let out a collective breath of shock. It was the one person who had been the most vocal about my guilt. Cassidy. But she wasn't there to help our parents. On the screen, she waited until they left the room, then she moved toward the safe herself. She didn't just look at the documents. She pulled out a small vial from her pocket and poured a clear liquid over the hard copies of the original will. "Wait," I whispered, my heart skipping a beat. I hadn't seen this part of the footage yet. I had only watched the first few minutes before the hearing to confirm my parents' involvement. On the screen, Cassidy watched the paper dissolve, a twisted, manic smile on her face. Then, she picked up the phone and dialed a number. "It's done," she said into the receiver. "The parents think they're framing Sloane. Sloane thinks she's caught the parents. But by the time I'm through, none of them will have a cent. The entire Sterling estate is moving to the Cayman account tonight, just like we planned." I looked at my sister. Her face was no longer pale, it was cold, calculating. She wasn't the bratty younger sister anymore. She was the one holding the real knife. "Who are you talking to, Cassidy?" I asked, the remote trembling in my hand. Cassidy didn't look scared. She slowly stood up, straightened her skirt, and looked at me with eyes that were absolutely dead. "You think a hidden camera is your trump card, Sloane?" She laughed, a sound like dry leaves. "That video is 3 days old. The money is already gone. And the person on the other end of that phone? He's already in this room." The air in the boardroom turned from freezing to suffocating. My sister's words hung there like a noose. "The person on the other end of that phone? He's already in this room." I looked at my parents. They looked completely blindsided, their own treachery eclipsed by their daughter's deeper betrayal. My mother reached out for the table to steady herself. "Cassidy, what did you do?" she stammered. "We were doing this for us. To keep the family together." "No, Mother," Cassidy spat, her voice dripping with years of suppressed resentment. "You were doing it for your social standing. Dad was doing it for his gambling debts. I'm doing it because I'm the only one in this family with the guts to actually finish what grandmother started." I scanned the room. My eyes landed on the lawyer, Mr. Henderson. He had been grandmother's most trusted confidant for 40 years. He was the one who drafted the will. He was the one who told me grandmother wanted me to have the foundation. Mr. Henderson slowly stood up. He didn't look ashamed. He didn't look surprised. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, Not the one we had been discussing, but something on heavy, cream-colored cardstock. "I believe this is what you're looking for, Cassidy," Henderson said, his voice as smooth as aged bourbon. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Mr. Henderson? You are the one on the phone?" "Business is business, Sloan," he said, finally looking me in the eye. The warmth I had known for 2 decades was replaced by a sterile, professional coldness. "Your grandmother was a brilliant woman, but in her final months, she became sentimental. She wanted to leave a billion-dollar empire to a creative who wanted to give it all away to charity. That's not a legacy. That's a liquidation." Cassidy walked over to him, standing by his side. The alliance was clear. The snake and the vulture had teamed up. "The camera feed you just showed us?" Cassidy said, pointing to the screen. "It's adorable. Really. But while you were playing detective with your little hidden gadgets, I was signing the actual transfer papers. Using the power of attorney grandmother signed over to Mr. Henderson when she was confused last month." "She was never confused," I yelled, my voice cracking. "She was sharp until the very last breath." "On paper? She was a senile old woman who didn't know her own name," Henderson countered. "And since you've just proven on camera that your parents were attempting to commit fraud, they are now legally barred from contesting anything I do with the estate. You've done the hard work for us, Sloan. You disqualified the only people who had the standing to sue me." My parents collapsed into their chairs, the weight of their own greed finally crushing them. They had tried to frame me, and in doing so, they had handed the keys to the kingdom to a corrupt lawyer and a sociopathic sister. I looked at the screen again. The video was still playing in the background. My grandmother's empty chair sat in the corner of the frame, a silent witness to the destruction of her life's work. "So that's it?" I asked, looking around the room at my extended family. "You're all just going to let them walk away with everything? The Sterling Foundation, the hospitals, the schools grandmother funded, it's all just going to disappear into a Cayman account." My Uncle Robert looked down at his lap. My Aunt Sarah adjusted her pearls. They were terrified. Henderson held the purse strings now, and they weren't about to bite the hand they hoped would feed them. "Leave, Sloan," Cassidy said, her voice a cruel whisper. "Before I have security drag you out for trespassing. You have no money, no home, and now no family." I looked at the remote in my hand. My thumb hovered over a second button, one I hadn't mentioned. "You're right, Cassidy," I said, a small, dangerous smile forming on my lips. "I don't have a family anymore. But you're wrong about one thing." "Oh. And what's that?" she sneered. "You think grandmother only had one camera in that office." I pressed the second button. The screen didn't show the office this time. It showed a high-definition, brightly lit view of a safety deposit box. And inside that box was a money. It was a second will, dated yesterday. And the person signing it in the video wasn't my grandmother. It was someone else. The room went so quiet you could hear the blood rushing in your ears. Cassidy's confident posture shattered. She lunged for the remote, but I stepped back, holding it high. "Look closely at the date, Cassidy," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "That video wasn't recorded at the estate. It was recorded at the Veterans Memorial Hospital less than 24 hours before grandmother passed. And that man standing next to her? That's General Marcus Thorne. He's the executor of the real final will." Henderson's face turned a ghostly shade of gray. "That's impossible. I am the sole legal representative of Beatrice Sterling. I have the power of attorney." "You had it," I corrected, a surge of adrenaline finally replacing the fear. "The moment grandmother suspected you and Cassidy were conspiring, she revoked it. But she didn't do it through your firm. She did it through a private military legal counsel. She knew if she went to a local lawyer, you'd find out." On the screen, my grandmother looked up at the camera. She looked tired, her skin pale against the hospital pillows, but her eyes, the legendary sterling blue eyes, were as sharp as diamonds. "If you are watching this," grandmother's voice crackled through the speakers, making everyone in the room jump. It was like a ghost had just walked into the boardroom. "It means my family has failed the final test. To my daughter Genevieve and my son-in-law Arthur, Your greed was expected, but your cruelty toward your own daughter is unforgivable. To Cassidy, I saw the darkness in you early on, but I prayed I was wrong. I wasn't. Cassidy backed away from the screen, shaking her head. No, no, she was medicated. She didn't know what she was doing. I am of sound mind, the video Beatrice continued, as if hearing her. And I have moved every single liquid asset, all $900 million, into a trust that cannot be touched by any Sterling family member, except for one. The lawyer, Henderson, scrambled to his briefcase, his hands shaking so violently he dropped his gold pen. This won't hold up in court. This is an ambush. It's not an ambush, Mr. Henderson, I said, walking toward him. It's an audit. General Thorne isn't just a friend. He's the head of a federal task force investigating offshore money laundering. While you were busy moving money to the Caymans, he was watching every single transaction hit the honeypot account grandmother set up. My father stood up, his face a mask of desperation. Sloan, honey, we were trying to protect the legacy. You're a Sterling. You can't let the government take everything. I'm not letting the government take it, I said, turning to him. Grandmother left the foundation to me. But the personal assets? The houses, the cars, the jewelry, and the remaining cash. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was agonizing. She left them to the one group of people you've spent your whole lives looking down on. On the screen, grandmother held up the final page of the will. It listed the beneficiaries. My parents leaned in, their eyes wide with a horrific realization. She didn't. My mother whispered, clutching her chest. She wouldn't. She did, I said. Every penny of the personal fortune is going to the Sterling Estate Staff Pension Fund. The maids, the gardeners, the drivers, the people who actually cared for her while you were busy planning her downfall. But there was one more thing. A twist I hadn't even seen coming. On the screen, grandmother beckoned someone over. A young man stepped into the frame. He looked familiar, shockingly familiar. Wait, Cassidy gasped. Who is that? The young man looked at the camera and smiled. It was the same smile I saw in the mirror every morning. Hi, family, the man said. I bet you didn't know grandmother had a secret she kept for 27 years. The man on the screen looked like a ghost from a past we didn't know existed. He looked exactly like me if I had been born a man. He had the same sharp jawline, the same focused gaze, and that unmistakable Sterling air of quiet authority. This is Julian, grandmother's voice said from the speakers, her hand resting on the young man's arm. 27 years ago, before Genevieve and Arthur decided that their public image was more important than the truth, a child was born. A child they were told didn't survive. But I knew better. I've spent 2 decades making sure he was raised away from the poison of this family. My mother, Genevieve, looked like she had been struck by lightning. She slumped back into her chair, her face a ghostly white. Julian, she breathed, her voice a fractured whisper. They told me the hospital said he was stillborn. They told you what you wanted to hear, so you could focus on your social climbing without the complication of a twin, I said, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place in my own mind. Grandmother had dropped hints for years about the one who got away and the lost branch. I thought she was talking about business. I was wrong. Julian looked directly into the camera lens, his expression hardening. I grew up in a small town in Oregon, raised by a woman who used to be grandmother's head of security. I never knew who I was until 6 months ago. Grandmother reached out because she knew she couldn't leave the Sterling name in the hands of people who would treat their own children like disposable assets. Cassidy was hyperventilating now. Her plan to steal the fortune was evaporating in real time. This is a scam. A long con. You've found some lookalike to steal our inheritance. He's not a lookalike, Cassidy, I said, pointing to the screen where Julian was holding a DNA report. The test was verified by 3 independent labs. He is my twin brother. And according to the new will, he and I are the co-trustees of the entire Sterling estate. But then, the video took a darker turn. Julian stepped away from the bed and picked up a tablet, showing it to the camera. While I was learning about my family, Julian said, his voice cold as ice, I was also using my background in forensic accounting to look into the Sterling Highlands Estates books. And what I found wasn't just greed. It was a crime. He looked at my father, Arthur. Dad, did you really think grandmother wouldn't notice the consulting fees you were paying to a shell company in Panama? Or the fact that you were using the family's charitable foundation to launder money for your offshore betting ring? My father lunged for the screen, but two of the security guards, men who had worked for the family for years, stepped in front of him. They didn't move to protect him. They moved to block him. "Stay seated, Mr. Sterling," the head of security said, his voice devoid of its usual professional warmth. Julian continued on the screen. "And Henderson, we know about the backdoor you built into the trust software." Every dollar Cassidy thought she was moving to her account was actually being rerouted into a federal escrow account held by General Thorne's team. Henderson looked at Cassidy. Cassidy looked at Henderson. The alliance of convenience was turning into a cage. They had been outplayed by a woman who was dying and a brother they didn't know existed. "So," I said, turning to the room of stunned relatives, "the assets are frozen. The police are waiting at the bottom of the mountain. And the only people with the authority to drop the charges are Julian and myself." I leaned over the table, looking my mother in the eye. "You called me a thief today. You tried to destroy my life in front of everyone. Now, give me one reason why I shouldn't let the authorities take you all away right now." My mother opened her mouth to speak, but before she could utter a word, a loud, heavy bang echoed from the boardroom doors. The doors swung open. But it wasn't the police. It was a woman in a black suit, holding a legal folder that looked identical to the one Henderson had. She looked at me, then at Julian on the screen, and then at Cassidy. "I'm afraid there's been a complication," she said. "I represent the other Sterling estate." The room felt like it had been plunged into a deep freeze. Even Julian, projected on the screen behind me, went silent. I looked at the woman. She looked like power personified, the kind of person who doesn't raise her voice because she doesn't have to. "Who are you?" I demanded, my hand tightening on the remote. "The other Sterling estate?" "There is no other estate. My grandmother was the sole owner of the Sterling conglomerate." The woman placed her folder on the mahogany table with a soft thud. "My name is Victoria Sterling. I am Beatrice's younger sister. The sister the family records say died in a boating accident 40 years ago." A collective gasp rippled through the room. My mother, Genevieve, actually fell out of her chair, her knees giving way. "Aunt Victoria?" "But the funeral, the closed casket, was a very expensive piece of theater," Victoria said, her voice like cracking ice. She didn't even look at my mother. She looked at me. Beatrice was the face of the company. I was the architect of its growth. We had a disagreement 4 decades ago about the direction of the Sterling legacy. She wanted philanthropy. I wanted power. So we split. I took my half of the assets into the shadows, and she kept this Sterling name to play saint with. Cassidy, ever the opportunist, saw a flicker of hope. She scrambled to her feet, smoothing her hair. "Aunt Victoria, thank God you're here. Sloane and this imposter on the screen are trying to dismantle everything. They're giving the money to the servants. You have to stop them." Victoria turned her gaze toward Cassidy. It was like watching a predator observe an insect. "I didn't come here to save you, Cassidy. I came here because Beatrice is dead and our non-compete agreement died with her." She opened her folder and slid a document across the table toward the lawyer, Henderson. He looked at it, his eyes widening so far I thought they might pop. "This is a debt recall?" Henderson stammered. "Correct," Victoria said calmly. "Every piece of land this family owns, the Napa estate, the Aspen house we are standing in, the London townhouse, wasn't actually owned by Beatrice. It was leased from my holding companies. Beatrice paid the rent for 40 years to keep the secret. Now that she's gone, the leases are terminated, effective immediately." I felt the floor shift beneath me. "You're evicting everyone?" "I'm reclaiming my property, Sloane," Victoria said. "And since your real will deals with the liquid assets, the cash, you'll find that without the physical infrastructure of the Sterling Corporation, that cash is going to disappear very quickly into lawsuits and operational collapses." She looked at the screen at Julian. "And as for you, young man, You've been a very busy hacker. But you're playing in a sandbox I built. I didn't just know you existed. I'm the one who paid for your forensic accounting degree through a series of anonymous scholarships. I wanted you sharp. I didn't realize you'd be so idealistic. Julian's face on the screen darkened. You are the shadow donor? You've been tracking me my whole life. I've been tracking all of you, Victoria said. She turned back to me. Sloane, you have the will. You have the heart. But you don't have the stomach for what comes next. My sister wanted a revenge story, where the good girl wins. But in the real world, the house always wins. And I am the house. She reached into her folder and pulled out a second remote. She pressed a button, and a second screen lowered from the ceiling. It showed a live feed of the Aspen driveway. Dozens of black SUVs were pulling up, blocking the exit. Men in tactical gear were stepping out. This isn't the police, is it? I whispered. No, Victoria smiled, and it was the scariest thing I had ever seen. It's my private security team. They're here to ensure that no theft occurs while we transition the assets. Which means nobody leaves this room until I have the signatures I need. She looked at my parents, then at Cassidy, then at me. I'm offering a deal. One that Beatrice was too weak to make. Sign over the trust management to me, and I'll make the money laundering and fraud charges against your parents disappear. You can keep your little foundation, Sloane. But the Sterling Empire? That belongs to me. Cassidy grabbed a pen before Victoria could even finish the sentence. I'll sign. Just give me a seat at the table. Wait, I shouted. Don't sign anything. But Victoria wasn't looking at Cassidy. She was looking at me, waiting. What's it going to be, Sloane? Do you want your revenge on your parents, or do you want to save them from a life in prison? Because you can't have both. I looked at the screen. Julian was typing furiously. He caught my eye and gave a tiny, almost invisible nod. He was trying to get through her firewall. I just had to buy him time. I need to see the full contract, I said, my voice trembling. And I want to know what really happened 40 years ago. Why did you fake your death? Victoria leaned back, a cold glint in her eyes. You want a story, Sloane? Fine. But it's a story that's going to cost you everything. 40 years ago, this family wasn't an empire. Victoria began, her back to us. It was a sinking ship. Our father had gambled away the textile mills, and the Sterling name was a joke in every boardroom from New York to Geneva. Beatrice was the pretty one. She wanted to marry well and forget the debt. I was the one who saw the potential in the emerging tech markets. She turned around, her eyes boring into mine. We found a way to save the company, but it required a sacrifice. A large sum of untraceable capital. I arranged for a massive insurance payout. My own life was the collateral. I died in that boating accident so the Sterling family could live. Beatrice took the money, rebranded the company, and played the grieving, heroic sister while I built the infrastructure from the shadows. You didn't just die for the money, I said, my heart cold. You did it to avoid the investigation into where that capital really came from. You were laundering even back then. Victoria laughed, a sharp, metallic sound. I was surviving, Sloane. Something you and your parents know nothing about. You've lived your lives on the interest of my death. And now, Beatrice has tried to cut me out of the final payout by giving everything to a designer and a boy from Oregon. On the screen, Julian's hands were moving like a blur. A small red progress bar appeared at the bottom of his feed, hidden from Victoria's view. He was at 42%. I had to keep her talking. If you've been in the shadows this whole time, I asked, why come out now? You could have kept taking the lease payments forever. Because Beatrice went rogue, Victoria snapped. She didn't just leave the money to you. She left a kill switch in the Foundation's bylaws. If the Foundation is activated, it triggers a mandatory audit of every Sterling-linked entity, including my holding companies. She wasn't just being charitable, Sloane. She was trying to take me down with her from the grave. My mother let out a strangled sob. So this was all a trap? For all of us. Beatrice was always the saint. Victoria sneered, looking at my mother with pure disgust. But she was the most calculating of us all. She knew your greed would lead to this hearing. She knew I would have to show my face to stop the audit. She staged this entire drama just to force a final confrontation. Victoria walked over to the lawyer, Henderson, who was still trembling. She snatched the pen from his hand and slammed the contract down in front of me. Sign it, Sloan. Sign the management of the trust over to VS Holdings. The audit stops. Your parents go free. You keep your title as head of the foundation, even if it's just a hollow shell. Or I let the doors open, let the feds in, and we all go down together. But I have the resources to disappear again. You and your parents? You'll rot in a cell. Cassidy grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Sloan, sign it. I don't care about the foundation. Just don't let them take me to jail for what I did to the accounts. I looked at the screen. The progress bar was at 78%. Julian's face was glistening with sweat. He looked up for a split second and mouthed, 10 minutes. I looked at the contract. The fine print was a death warrant for everything grandmother had worked for. It didn't just give Victoria the money. It gave her the power to dismantle every hospital and school the Sterling name supported. I won't do it, I said, my voice barely a whisper. What? My father roared, standing up. Sloan, look at those men outside. This isn't a game. Sign the damn paper. No, I said, louder this time. I looked at Victoria. You talk about survival like it's a virtue. But look at what it's turned you into. You're a ghost in a black suit, threatening your own family in a house you don't even live in. Grandmother didn't leave me a kill switch to destroy the family. She left it to destroy the rot. Victoria's face contorted with rage. She leaned in close, her breath smelling of expensive mints and cold steel. You think you're being brave? You're being a martyr for people who would sell your organs if the price was right.
Sign it now.
She raised her hand, and through the window, I saw the men in tactical gear begin to move toward the house. Wait, I yelled. I'll sign, but only if Julian is included in the immunity deal. And I want to see the confirmation that the forensic evidence against my parents is actually destroyed. Victoria smirked. A negotiator. Good. I like that better than a saint. She began typing on a laptop to bring up the files. On the screen behind her, Julian's progress bar hit 95%. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. The digital screen showing Julian went black for a second, then a new image appeared. It wasn't Julian anymore. It was a live broadcast. And in the corner of the screen, there was a logo I recognized. The Global News Network. What is this? Victoria hissed, spinning around. The one thing you forgot, Aunt Victoria, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. Grandmother didn't just hire a hacker. She hired a broadcaster. The news anchor's voice filled the room. Breaking news. A massive leak of documents from the mysterious VS Holdings has just revealed a 40-year tax evasion and money laundering scheme involving the presumed dead Victoria Sterling. The air didn't just feel cold anymore. It felt electric. The silence of the room was shattered by the rhythmic, urgent voice of the news anchor. Every secret Victoria had spent 40 years burying was being broadcast to millions of people in real time. This is impossible, Victoria whispered. She turned to her laptop, her fingers flying over the keys, but the screen was locked. A large, stylized S, the Sterling family crest, glowed on her monitor. It wasn't just an audit, Victoria, I said, stepping away from her. Julian didn't just hack your firewall. He opened the gates. Every document, every shell company, every lease agreement you used to hold this family hostage, it's all on a public server now. The Department of Justice, the IRS, and the press all have the password. My mother let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She realized that while she was being exposed, the woman who was trying to replace her was being dismantled even faster. You've ruined us all, my father groaned, burying his face in his hands. Sloan, you've destroyed the Sterling name forever. The Sterling name was already destroyed by the people in this room, I replied, looking at him with a pity that hurt more than anger. I'm just the one who's finally cleaning up the mess. Victoria spun around, her eyes wide with a manic, terrifying energy. She looked out the window at her security team. They won't get to me. I have the exits covered. I'll be gone before the first siren hits the driveway. She grabbed her folder and moved toward the door, but it didn't open. The heavy mahogany doors remained locked. The smart home system, Victoria. Julian's voice boomed back over the speakers as his video feed flickered back to life. He was smiling now, a cold, satisfied smile. Remember how you said you built the sandbox I play in? Well, I just changed the locks on the sandbox. This house is on total lockdown. Nobody goes out, and only the authorities come in. You little brat. Victoria screamed at the screen. She lunged for the door, rattling the handles, but the electronic bolts were engaged. In the background, the news broadcast continued. Sources say the leak originated from an internal, whistleblower program set up by the late Beatrice Sterling herself. The documents provide a roadmap to nearly $2 billion in hidden assets. I looked at Cassidy. My sister, the one who had tried to play every side, was now curled in a chair, shaking. She knew there was no deal left to make. No Cayman account, no inheritance, no escape. Why, Sloan? Cassidy asked, her voice small. You were the favorite. You could have just taken the money and let us go. Why did you have to burn it all down? Because grandmother's final wish wasn't for me to be rich, Cassidy, I said. It was for me to be free. And none of us can be free as long as this family's legacy is built on lies and theft. Suddenly, the sound of a heavy engine roared outside. It wasn't the SUVs. It was the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a helicopter. A spotlight swept across the boardroom, blinding us for a second as it passed over the windows. The feds? Arthur asked, a glimmer of fear in his eyes. Not just the feds, I said. On the screen, Julian held up a final document. The morality clause grandmother mentioned wasn't just for the heirs. It was for the entire estate. Since every adult Sterling in that room has now been implicated in criminal activity on a global broadcast, the contingency protocol has been activated. What protocol? Victoria demanded, her voice trembling. The Scorched Earth Protocol, Julian said. The Sterling Corporation is being dissolved.
Right now.
The assets are being liquidated and moved into a permanent, untouchable endowment for the charities grandmother loved. The houses, the jets, the VS Holdings properties, they're being seized by the state. I looked at my mother, who was staring at her diamond rings as if they were already turning to lead. I looked at the lawyer, Henderson, who had slumped to the floor, knowing his career was over. And then I looked at the door. The sound of heavy boots was echoing in the hallway. The lockdown was about to be breached, but not by Victoria's men. One last thing, Aunt Victoria, I said. Grandmother knew you'd try to use your security team. That's why she didn't just call the police. She called the one person you could never bribe. The boardroom doors groaned under the pressure of a hydraulic ram. With a deafening crack, the wood splintered, and the doors flew open. A tall man in a dark suit stepped through the smoke, followed by a dozen armed agents. He didn't look at my parents. He didn't look at me. He walked straight to Victoria. Victoria Sterling, the man said. I'm Agent Miller with the International Crimes Division. You've been a very hard woman to find for 40 years. But as the agents moved in to handcuff her, Victoria did something no one expected. She didn't fight. She didn't run. She looked at me and started to laugh. You think you've won, Sloan? She wheezed through her laughter. You think the money is going to charity? You really are your grandmother's granddaughter. You're so blind to the real play. The real play? I asked, my voice barely audible over the shouting and the static of the radios. The money is gone, Victoria. The documents are public. There is no play left. Victoria leaned toward me, the handcuffs clicking shut around her wrists.
Oh, Sloan.
You think this was about a will? You think Beatrice spent $5 million on a hidden camera system and a high-tech audit just to catch a few greedy relatives? She glanced at my mother, who was being escorted out in tears. She knew they were small time. She knew I was the shadow. But she also knew something else. Something about you. I felt a cold bead of sweat roll down my spine. What are you talking about? The Scorched Earth Protocol, Victoria whispered, her voice dropping to a chillingly calm register. Who do you think is the sole administrator of that new, untouchable endowment? Who do you think holds the keys to the rebranded Sterling legacy? On the screen, Julian's face suddenly flickered. His smile disappeared, replaced by a look of intense concentration. Sloan, wait. I'm looking at the final layer of the trust encryption. There's a secondary clause. It wasn't triggered by the crimes. It was triggered by the broadcast. Explain, I demanded, turning to the screen. Grandmother didn't just want to take down the family, Julian said, his voice trembling. She wanted to see if you would actually pull the trigger. She wanted to know if you were willing to destroy the Sterling name to save your own soul. The moment you authorized the leak to the news, the moment you chose total destruction over a compromise with Victoria. Victoria finished his sentence, her eyes gleaming. You proved you were a true Sterling, Sloan. Only a Sterling has the cold-bloodedness to ruin their entire bloodline for a higher cause. You didn't win for the servants. You won because you're the most dangerous one in the room. I looked at my hands. They were shaking.
No.
I did it because it was right. Is it? Victoria challenged. Check the bank routing for the charity endowment, Julian. Tell her where the first 100 million just landed. Julian's fingers flew across his keyboard. His face went pale. It didn't go to the hospitals.
Not yet.
It landed in a private offshore management account, under a single name.
I didn't even have to ask.
I knew. Sloan Sterling, Julian whispered. I turned back to Victoria, horrified. I never asked for this. I won't take it. You already have, Victoria said as the agents began to lead her away. The moment you pressed send on that broadcast, you became the person Beatrice wanted. The person I was. The person who decides who lives and who dies in this empire. You're not the victim anymore, Sloan. You're the master of the house. And now, everyone is going to be coming for you. The agents led her out, leaving me standing in the middle of the ruined boardroom. My parents were gone. My sister was being questioned in the corner. The lawyer was a broken man. I was alone, with $1 billion and a target on my back. But as I stared at the empty chair where my grandmother used to sit, I realized there was one person still on the screen. One person who hadn't been accounted for in the scorched earth protocol. Julian,
I asked.
Are you still there? There was a long pause. Julian looked at the camera, but his expression had changed. The warmth was gone. The twin brother who had helped me find the truth was looking at me with a new kind of intensity. I'm here, Sloan, he said. But the police are at my door in Oregon. Apparently, anonymous sources reported me for the very hack I'd just performed to save you. My heart stopped. Victoria? No, Julian said, his voice cracking. The report came from grandmother's automated server. It was sent the moment the leak went live. She didn't just frame our parents, Sloan. She framed me. She made sure that I'd be a fugitive and you'd be the only one left standing. A new realization hit me like a physical blow. Grandmother hadn't been trying to unite us. She had been pruning the tree. And I was the only branch she allowed to stay. Julian, I'll fix this, I said desperately. I have the money now. I'll hire the best lawyers. With what money, Sloan? Julian asked, a bitter laugh escaping him. The money that's now flagged as proceeds of a crime because I hacked it to give it to you? If you use that money to help me, you're an accessory. If you don't, I go to prison for life. The trap wasn't just for the villains. It was the ultimate test for the hero. I stood in the wreckage of my family, holding a golden ticket that felt like a death warrant. Julian's face on the screen was a mirror of my own, terrified, betrayed, and yet, somewhere deep in those sterling blue eyes, there was a spark of calculation. Grandmother didn't want a successor. I whispered to the empty room. She wanted a survivor. Beatrice Sterling hadn't just left me a fortune. She had left me her greatest burden, the necessity of being ruthless. By framing Julian, she had placed the final piece of the puzzle in my hands. If I used the money to save him, I would become a criminal in the eyes of the law, losing the foundation and the saintly reputation I had just earned. If I let him go to prison, I would be the sole, undisputed queen of the Sterling Empire, rich, powerful, and utterly alone. "Sloane," Julian said, his voice steadying as the sound of sirens grew louder on his end of the feed. "She's watching us. Even from the grave, she's watching to see what you do. Don't let her win. Don't become her." I looked at the remote in my hand. One button had exposed the truth. Another had trapped a ghost. Now I had to find a third option. "I'm not becoming her, Julian," I said, a cold clarity washing over me. "I'm becoming the version of her she was too afraid to be." I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call the police. I dialed the one number grandmother had left in a sealed envelope marked, "In case of absolute silence." The call was answered on the first ring. A voice I didn't recognize, deep, professional, and ancient, spoke only 2 words: "Status check." "The scorched earth protocol is a failure," I said, my voice sounding like sharpened flint. "I am the sole administrator of the VS Holdings assets. I am revoking the whistleblower status of the Julian Sterling files. I am authorizing a private settlement with the Department of Justice using the offshore management account. And I want the Sterling Highlands estate leveled by morning." Julian's eyes widened on the screen. "Sloane, what are you doing?" "I'm ending the story, Julian," I said. "Grandmother wanted a legacy. I'm giving her a vacuum. By settling with the government using the very money they were set to seize, I created a legal paradox that would tie the courts up for a decade, enough time to move Julian to a safe house and vanish the liquid assets into the very charities they were promised to. I wasn't going to be the master of the house. I was going to be the woman who burned the house down and used the ashes to build something real." I walked out of the boardroom, past the splintered doors and the ghosts of my family's greed. As I stepped into the crisp aspen night, the snow felt clean against my skin. My name is Sloane Sterling. I was a thief, a designer, a granddaughter, and a sister. But as the first demolition crews pulled up to the gates of the estate, I realized I was finally something else. I was free. This was a story about revenge, but it was also a story about the masks we wear for the people we love, and the ones we drop when the money is on the line. If you stayed until the very end, thank you for being part of this journey. What would you have done? Would you have saved your brother and risked it all, or taken the $1 billion and walked away? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this high-stakes revenge story, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good twist, and subscribe to Silent Revenge Lab for more stories where the underdog finally bites back. Click the bell icon so you never miss a reveal. Until next time, remember, the most dangerous person in the room is the one who has nothing left to lose.